The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. 3 very interesting stories today. One is about millennials and the divorce rate. And a new study is pointing out that millennials are reducing the overall... the hammering has started. That is not good. We're going to power through here, and we only have a couple weeks left in the studio, but the hammering has begun.
Please don't have a Lawrence O'Donnell moment here.
I won't.
Stop the hammering. Someone stop the hammering.
So you might think that the reason millennials are holding down the divorce rate is because they're not getting divorced, which is sort of true, but really what's going on are 2 different things. Number one, people in general get divorced after a certain amount of marriage. Millennials are getting married later, partially for societal reasons, partially for economic reasons, including student loans, as we've talked about before. So more millennials who are married simply haven't been married long enough yet for the divorces to start becoming as frequent. And in addition to that, you also have a situation where if you don't get married, you're not going to get divorced. And the longer you wait before getting married, the less likely you are to get divorced. So in other words, it's known that when you get married later in life, you're in general making a better, more informed choice that maybe is more aligned with who you are as a person, so that if you get married at 35 instead of 25, your divorce rate is lower.
I don't know about you, but I'm about ready to get divorced from this building with all that background construction noise.
Yeah, it's
I
insane.
think another factor could be less religiosity among the younger generation.
Interesting.
Because, you know, one of the key tenets of Christianity and other religions is to wait to have sex until you're married.
Right.
So in prior generations, people would get married at, say, the age of 20 because, you know, they don't want to put that off for too much longer. But, you know, now if people don't buy into that stuff, there is less hesitation when it comes to having promiscuous sex and just having multiple partners early on.
Yeah, I think that that's probably also a factor. Now, we'll see if ultimately millennials end up having the same divorce rate as their predecessors, just the divorces would be happening a little later because they're getting married later in life. And it may well be that way. We just don't know yet.
It could be. I suspect that it won't, though, because I feel like if you date for the entirety of your like teens and 20s and then find someone you want to settle down and, you know, have kids with in your 30s, by that age, I feel like you understand who you are as a person and what you want out of a relationship enough so that it can sustain through the entirety of your life. And, you know, things change, obviously, but I think I suspect that the divorce rates won't go back up. That's just my prediction.
There are 2 interesting hypotheses about marriage as longevity continues to increase. So imagine for a moment that longevity for humans, life expectancy at birth went from, I think it's around high 70s, 80 in the US right now, something like that. Imagine that it went from that to 100, right? You are going to have a situation that could go one of 2 ways according to futurists. And of course, what do futurists know? They're often wrong. One would be that if life expectancy became 100 instead of 80, people would wait even longer to get married, so that you might have people living 50 years as single people and pushing back marriage even further, right? That's like one hypothesis. The problem with that one is that it would interfere, if there aren't significant changes to the age at which women can continue having children, it's going to be sort of unaligned. The other idea is that you would there would be less of an expectation that when you get married that it's for life, right? The idea that, as has been described in many science fiction books where people live a long time, you might be married from age 30 to 60, and you might be a lawyer from age 30 to 60, and then you might have sort of a next stage in your life where it's expected that you are going to do some combination of both a career change and looking for a new partner, because 80 years is a long time to be doing one job and being with one person, maybe, right? Society might see that. I have no idea, but it's interesting.
It's becoming more and more of an unrealistic promise that people make that when they get married, they're going to stay with one another for the rest of their lives. You know, if life expectancy was 50, I think that's totally reasonable, right? But people change over time, circumstances change over time, and, you know, just because a marriage ends doesn't mean it was a failure. That's my 2 cents on that.
There you go. That's Pat's advice.
It was important at that time, at that place, and now we've moved on.
There you go. I like it. I like it a lot. Let's talk about cannabis and lobsters. 2 subjects Pat would know nothing about. The state of Maine has asked the owner of a lobster restaurant to no longer sedate lobsters with cannabis in order to get them high before they die. This is Charlotte Gill from Charlotte's Legendary Lobster Pound in Southwest Harbor, Maine. I've not been to Southwest Harbor nor to this particular restaurant. She believes that if you give the lobsters a small dose of cannabis, it helps to calm them down before they are steamed in a traditional lobster pot, and that it's sort of the equivalent of a bong hit for lobsters with no residual effects for consumers. The idea is just because the lobsters are high when they are killed for cooking, that it does not then get the people eating the lobster high. But regardless, she is still being asked not to do this anymore.
I mean, phase one of this conversation, getting the lobsters high, is that really going to calm them down before they're boiled alive? I think it's just going to make them too paranoid. Like, I certainly would not want that.
I think that either way, the cognitive capacity of the lobster makes it so that it has no clue what's going on whatsoever. And also, lobsters, to my knowledge, are basically kept on ice until the moment that they're steamed. So they're effectively comatose anyway and don't know what's going on. That's my understanding of it from having talked to people in the seafood industry.
Whenever I go to, like, legal seafoods, I see them swimming around in the tank. So they do that, and then they become on ice.
I've never been to legal seafoods. I don't know what they're doing there.
Boiling, that's torture.
Is it possible that the ones that are swimming around are not the ones that are immediately cooked? That, like, in the back they have a bunch of them on ice?
I think it's possible, but then there are also those psychopaths who, like, point out their
Say, I want that one.
prey and say,
Yeah.
that one looks good.
I don't know that I really care that much about this because I don't eat lobster. But if I were a consumer of lobster, I mean, would I want to have heard that the salmon that I had as sashimi had been given pot before it was killed?
Does it become edible at that point?
Yeah, I know. It's weird.
Does it transmit over to the human?
I don't think it does. But I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing.
You know, what's interesting with, like, hunting, the idea is to shoot the animal before it realizes you're there, before it starts running away, because apparently the meat tastes better. Again, something I would know nothing about.
I also
because
don't
I guess the chemicals that rush through their body because of the fight or flight instinct that sets in. So I'd imagine that if the lobster is more relaxed before death, that would also increase the quality of the lobster meat. But I don't think anyone's tried it yet. It's just been, kind of done in testing.
The A/B testing hasn't been done. Yeah, I mean, I would say two things. Number one, I don't think that the lobster is a complex enough organism that would make a difference. Number two, I just think that it's not an issue with lobsters because they are brought from this sort of cooled down, suspended animation almost state. I just don't think it would make a difference. I'm not a lobster connoisseur. I don't know.
It's kind of interesting how people debate whether or not it's humane to get the lobster high.
Right.
Like, is that too cruel? I'm less concerned about that. I'm a little bit more concerned about what happens after, which is them getting boiled alive.
Right.
That's not fun.
Well, I don't know. It's I've not been a lobster boiled alive. I don't know what they experience. But yeah, I think it's just like, is this really? I think it's more of just like legislative. It's more of a legal issue, I think, than a morally, an animal rights issue as far as Maine is concerned.
And with marijuana legalization being in its nascent stages still. It's just like people want to experiment in any way that they can, and this restaurant in Maine found a way to do so.
Speaking of experimentation, normally when you turn on a football game in the United States, not soccer, but like American football, at least one of the broadcasters is male, usually all of them other than like the sideline reporter. But there is big news in the sports broadcasting world because Hannah Storm and Andrea Kramer are going to be the first female announcing team to cover an NFL game tomorrow, with Amazon Prime Video offering them as an online alternative to the normal broadcast team of Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, who will be broadcasting the same football game on Fox. I think this is interesting. Some people will make the argument that if it's a sport that is played by men, that it makes sense for the broadcasters to be male. I don't think that's a particularly good argument.
No.
I was during the World Cup over the summer, I watched the games on Univision, which is in Spanish, and they had for some of their games an Argentinian woman who was doing the color commentary along with a male play-by-play guy. And I admit that at first it was notable to me because I just wasn't used to it. But then I became accustomed to it, and it didn't make shockingly, the experience was no worse with a woman offering opinions about what was going on in the game.
I agree with you. I'm just going to push back a little bit. It seems as though the female commentator, the colored commentator, had played soccer. I mean, you'd have to imagine so.
Yes.
Because typically the play-by-play people, those are the professionals. They study the sport in and out.
Yeah.
These two women know football way more than I will ever. But the color
play.
The color people
Yeah.
usually have played the game.
Fair.
They've been on the field, so they bring with that, a perspective that's unique and maybe that these females reporters can't bring.
That's the best argument. That's the best argument, which is when it comes to the play-by-play, it should be whoever is knowledgeable and a good broadcaster and knows about the sport. Gender doesn't matter. Nothing else should really matter. Should the policy be, and by the way, this is what we call first world problems, right? Should the policy be that color commentators who are offering analysis of the sport should be people who have played the sport? And of course, neither of these women have played American football since it is exclusively a male sport.
And it's not even so much policy as it is what makes the best television.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of duos for sports broadcasts that I absolutely cannot stand. I think the best pair right now in football is Al Michaels and Chris Collinsworth.
I can't stand
Sunday night.
I can't stand Chris Collinsworth. And Al Michaels is a fine broadcaster, but he's kind of a right-wing prick. And so I also just kind of don't like him.
What do you think about Tony Romo replacing Phil Simms? Because Phil Simms was just absolutely terrible. And Romo is okay. I'm kind of anchored to his horrible career as a football player when assessing his broadcasting talents. But I think he's all right.
I genuinely don't care. I really don't. I watch the Patriots. My football consumption is basically 2/3 of Patriots games. And for the most part, it's in social situations where I'm not really listening to the broadcast anyway. I'm talking to people in the room. So I really couldn't care less.
Even if they had 2 female reporters,
I'd be fine.
You'd be totally fine with that. The world wouldn't end.
Don't care.
We'd move on from this.
Yeah, just makes no difference to me.
Okay.
Is that depressing?
I mean, again, like you said, first world problems.
Yeah.
Same thing with getting lobsters high. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I completely agree. All right, that's it for today's bonus show. We will talk to you tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.